guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled Blocked Inside Restroom with Wheelchair. This will be short. I'm a wheelchair user and was in a relatively cramped, but otherwise accessible, men's room and was finishing up washing my hands when someone started coming in. There was already someone in the stall, so I hollered that he'd have to wait. But instead he just forced his way inside and demanded I tell him if I saw a gold ring in there. I told him, no, and that he had to let me get out of there. He didn't respect that answer. No, you gotta tell me if you saw a gold ring in there. And he didn't less the harassing down. I know I said, no, a few times and kept insisting that I be let out. It was less than a minute, but when someone has lost something valuable like that, it's as if they are the only person that matters. I already told you 3 times. No, I don't think he would have understood me if I used the word, thrice. He did finally let me out. Meanwhile, I was wearing an award ring, with no precious metals or gems. But the thought crossed my mind if he had seen that, how he might have reacted. Am I the a-hole for wanting to be let out of a restroom, particularly when it's cramped in there with my wheelchair? Do I have the right to demand a way out? The next story is titled New Hire Calls Mom to Get Out of Doing Dishes. So, before I begin, there are some things you should know. When this had happened, I was in a wheelchair, for medical reasons, so I could still walk and move around, but doing so was a big risk because my legs have the possibility to give out at any point. So, it started like any other day working at the drive-thru. I began by making the large container of sweet tea. Shortly following, the manager said that I was getting a new trainee, which I thought would be no problem. Fast forward to the lunch rush. I'm training the new hire and we're getting relatively busy, therefore I decided that it would be difficult to get the dishes done while serving customers. In turn, I asked the new guy if he would be able to get the dishes done for me while I handled the influx of people and proceeded to think nothing of it as he walked towards the dish pit. Then out of the corner of my eye I noticed that he's on his phone, so I took a moment to ask him what he was doing, to which he responded that he was calling his mom to contact the manager, so he didn't have to do the dishes. My initial reaction was disbelief in that he was actually calling his mother. Then that disbelief turned to silent anger, which prompted me to tell him to just continue his phone call in the manager's office and to stay out of my way. I then did something that I wasn't supposed to do at the time, with my specific medical problems. With every fiber of my being now fueled with the ire of 1,000 suns, I got out of my wheelchair and proceeded to run both the drive-thru and wash every single one of the dishes. As I began to trudge back towards my wheelchair, I collapsed due to the overexertion of my muscles. My manager made sure I was okay, and so I explained what took place with the trainee. He told me I was good to go home, and, as I was leaving, I heard yelling at what I can only assume was aimed at the trainee. I surmise he got fired because I never saw him again. I also then got my first raise there. I still don't know why that irked me so much in that moment, but it was, apparently, enough to get me to risk my own health over. The next story is entitled Women Steals Halloween Customs from Orphaned Children. Important information. I'm part of a sewing circle that makes clothes and blankets for the local home for children. The homes gives us a list of what they need and we make it. My husband and I also volunteer at one of the homes. This year my husbands and I agreed to take some of the children trick-or-treating this year, and my sewing circle all agreed to make Halloween customs for them, 12 in total. I get a call from one of the ladies from the sewing circle asking if she could bring someone from her church who expressed interest in learning how to sew to our next meeting. The circle is always hosted at my place as I have more room. To which I of course said yes, more the merrier, right? Our next meetup is the Friday before Halloween, and the girls and I were just putting the finishing touches on the customs, so plenty of time help this woman learn the basics of sewing. So Friday comes and girls come over, and this so-called Christian woman comes too. It all started out okay, we all show where we are on our projects and the customs look so good. Then we start showing this woman how to use her sewing machine and even helped her start her own project, a skirt. We stop for coffee. This woman makes a big scene about how she totally forgot she had to be somewhere and she had to leave right away, and she runs out. We didn't think much of it until we went back into my sewing room and 3 of the customs were missing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I checked my camera and there she was walking out with the customs. We all started to call and text until she blocks us. So the girls and I worked all Friday, Saturday and Sunday rushing to make this 3 customs, and no, she didn't go to church that Sunday. I think if Gracie saw her she would have given her a fat lip. The next story is titled Am I the A-hole for firing my WA-approved gardener after he tried to steal my departed uncle's priceless heirloom? Not the a-hole. Some background. Ever since I was a young boy, I was raised by my uncle. He has been exceptionally good to me, and so he and I were very close up until the time of his untimely departure several months ago. He left me everything, including the house he worked his whole life paying off to the bank, his extensive collection of books, and several pieces of jewelry he accumulated over the years. Yes, he was a man who liked to collect jewelry, and there's nothing wrong with that. One tiny complication of inheriting my uncle's house is that his house is in a fancy, pricey neighborhood and, of course, has an WA. To be honest, they're not as bad as some horror stories I've heard, but they have insisted on multiple occasions that my uncle and now I employ the services of a gardener to keep the outside of my house tidy. Oh, but not just any gardener, a specific gardener who has an in with the WA who offers a bulk discount if everyone uses his services. My uncle tried to make the best of the situation, befriending the gardener, sometimes letting him shower in our place or grab a water or a beer. Whatever, we should all look out for each other, right? But ever since I inherited the house, this guy has been pushing my limits, assuming I would be even more generous than my uncle. A few weeks ago, I ordered some special baked goods from one of those nationwide shipping services. These cookies are hard to get because they have to be refrigerated. I waited for these cookies for weeks. Well, I go to my kitchen to grab a bite and I find my gardener inside the house covered in crumbs instead of outside the house, tidying the yard. He had gone into my fridge and ate several of the cookies. I scolded him about it, he apologized, and I thought we would move on. Well, Tuesday morning was the last straw. While I was in my own living room cleaning up some of the jewelry boxes left by my uncle, the gardener came inside to use the restroom, noticed one of the pieces, and asked if I would let him hold it. I lost it and maybe went a little bit too far here. To be blunt, I told him to get the duck out of my house, go back to his own home, and never come back. My phone is now blowing up from the president and co-treasurer of the WA livid that I have cost them their bulk deal with the gardener and that they expect me to offset every other house's increased cost in my own WA dues because of how rude I was to a loyal employee who had served the community for many years. I think it's ridiculous to ask me to pay for everyone else's garden, but I'm feeling a little guilty about how I exploded at the gardener. Am I the a-hole? Comment said not the a-hole. Gardeners do not normally steal food or take showers in people's homes. That is super unusual and way out of line. Unless it's in the WA rules, you have every right to hire whomever you want. Sounds like the WA board was getting kickbacks or this person was related to someone. Another comment said not the a-hole. Lock the doors or change the locks, pay your dues on time, keep the house up to WA standards and ignore their calls. They can't make you pay for anything as a result of a vendor quitting a discounted rate. Also, why would you let a gardener openly walk in and out of your house? The next story is titled Stomp on Our Ceiling? We'll embarrass the hell out of you. I posted this as a comment a few months ago, and a few of you suggested I make it its own post. Over a decade ago, I went to college in a small town. It's a very oil-driven town. If you don't work for a drilling or wheel service company, you work for someone that supports or services this type of work. I was in school for automotive. The school was subsidized by 3 major automotive manufacturers, which helped out considerably on costs for tuition, books and rent. Rent was the big one. The school rented out about 24 apartments, subleased them to us, for a greatly discounted rate. As part of the class organization, we did 2 months at school, then rotated home and worked at a dealership as an apprentice for 2 months to get practical knowledge. While we were at home, another group rotated into school. This rotation went on for 18 months. These were not high-end by any means. They were lightly furnished with the best Walmart could buy. But we weren't complaining. For the bull majority of us, this was our first foray into independent living. I was assigned to live with 2 other guys in a small 3-bedroom on the bottom floor. It was a sub-level, with our windows being at ground level. The first week or 2 were great. No issues. We were all in the same manufacturer course, which had a starting class at 6:30 a.m., so we all helped out getting each other up and moving for class. After the first week though, we started having noise issues with the apartment above us. stomping around, or a child running heavy-footed. At first, we didn't mind it, kids will be kids. Then we realized that it was happening almost all hours. 2, 3, 4 a.m., the stomping never seemed to stop. This went on for about 2 weeks. Then magically stopped. We quickly realized that the man that lived above us was an oilfield worker and would leave on 2-week hitches on the rig, leaving his wife and 2 young kids. It was the times that he was gone that would get loud. We confronted her once we realized what was going on. This was our first time meeting her. She opened the door with a scowl and a, "What?" Being over a decade ago, I can't remember what she said exactly after that, but it amounted to us being scummed automotive students and that the other rotation was a terrible group of guys who partied and kept her kids up. It basically amounted to her idioting us out for what the other group did. We tried to explain that we didn't know them, and they didn't know us, and we couldn't be responsible for what they did. She replied, "Not my ducking problem," and slammed the door in our faces. The stomping increased from then on. Every attempt to talk to her was met with more anger, and she eventually stopped answering the door. It was at this point we decided to go to war. We started simple. We started following her around while tapping the ceiling with a broomstick. This backfired twofold. 1, she starts stomping harder. 2, we quickly realized that we were crushing the popcorn ceiling. Our solution after this was genius. This all occurred at the end of the heyday of flip phones. At this time, I had one with a prominent 1-inch antenna. While inspecting the ceiling to see how much damage we'd done with the broomstick, we found that a previous owner had installed hooks for hanging plants in almost every room. When we removed the hooks, we found that my phone's antenna and another roommate's antenna on his phone fit snuggly into each hole. This led to us calling the phones, which then transferred the vibrations to the ceiling, amplifying them considerably. The next week was an all-out assault. Anytime stomping started, we would insert a phone and start calling. We even recruited friends from school to do multiple rooms at once. For a day or two, the stomping increased. But by day 3, our barrage was having a serious effect. By day 5, we could hear her speaking to someone on the phone very loudly about the sound she couldn't explain. Finally, on the 6th day, she caved, and came down to confront us. The apartment was full, we had 8 to 10 of us over doing homework. My roommate, a very sarcastic man from southern New Mexico, answered the door. She demanded to know what we were using to make the buzzing sound, and to quit it immediately. With a straight face, my roommate replied that we weren't sure what it was. We figured one of her kids found one of her love toys, and had been playing with it and leaving it on or dropped it down a vent. We all burst out laughing hysterically, and a few of us got up to go to the door and see the look on her face. White as a ghost, she scurried away. We then heard the sounds of her tearing her apartment to pieces. To further the effect, we followed her from room to room, buzzing away. This went on for another half hour before we quit. The next day, we continued the noise, until we saw her husband come home. Being fellow working guys, we agreed early on that we didn't want to mess with him as the stomping ended when he was home. We heard an argument ensue shortly after he walked in, that lasted through the day. All was quiet the next few days, then, we left mid-week for our rotation home. When we returned, we found that they had moved out. Happy to be the straw that broke the camel's back, we went about our lives. We did find out later, after becoming friends with the apartment manager, that they had broken their lease about the time we left. The next story is titled "We Want Bikes." Quick introduction. I used to work front desk for 3 years up until August, but I've successfully escaped hospitality, though I sometimes miss the drama. Sigh. Here's a story of days long gone. Essential information. The hotel I worked at rented out bikes. Which, my fellow hotel workers already know, fall under the rule of, based upon availability. It is a beautiful Saturday summer morning, around 8 a.m. I'm in my checkout routine when I see 4 people entering the hotel. You know this feeling when checkout is not even done and you see a check-in arrive, and you want to roundhouse kick them in the face for interrupting your flow, but once they arrive at the desk you can't help but turn into the angel of hospitality? Yeah. Lucky for me, their room wasn't ready anyway, so nothing for me to do other than open the garage door for them to park their car, right? Ah, they would already like to rent some bikes. Sure, no problem. Let me get that sorted while you go park your car. Which is when I realized that the guests who had rented the bikes the day before hadn't returned the keys yet. I did not have 4 bikes. Please bear in mind that 2 of those 4 people hadn't even reserved a room at the hotel. The group returns from the garage. I am so sorry. Yada yada yada. No bikes. But here are the addresses for 2 bike rentals in the neighborhood. Problem solved, right? Right? No, because they called ahead and the nice young man on the phone promised them that they would be able to pick up those bikes when they came to check in at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Now, what is the shiniest golden rule of hospitality? Say it with me. No. Promises. This is what I teach every new agent I had to train the second they take position at the front desk. No. Promises. So I explained to them the old availability rule. I can see my words arriving at their ears, bouncing off and crashing into my face. They were promised bikes. Again, I apologize, it seems that not enough keys had been returned for them to rent. The woman, who wouldn't even stay at the hotel, stares daggers at me and commands me to call the rooms with the guests that had the keys. I refuse, I would not wake up checked-in guests. She doesn't care if they are still sleeping, she planned a bike tour and I was messing everything up. They made restaurant reservations, they had a whole day planned with those bikes. So you're telling me, you planned a bike tour with no bikes? It is the usual back and forth, me defending my current guests, she raising her voice, but believe it or not, they relent and trot off to one of the rentals I recommended. Only to return 10 minutes later. With no bikes. The shop only opens in 2 hours. Whoops, my bad. Again, the woman who hasn't even reserved a room is yelling at me to call the guests with the keys. But you know how it is, dear colleagues, yelling doesn't get guests anywhere, so I just stand there with my legs shaking and a neutral smile plastered on my face, apologizing and explaining what based upon availability means, hoping this would be over soon. At some point I get tired of repeating myself and just let her anger wash over me until she realizes I've turned into a black hole absorbing her screams. With nothing else to do, she calls me an idiot before stomping up to the breakfast room and demanding free coffee. I may correct myself. I do not miss the drama. The next story is titled How Hard Is It to Find Food Help? Rhetorical question. We just hired a housekeeper who frequently comes in smelling of alcohol, at 8 a.m. Mind you. And leaving early, sometimes very early. Which means we have to give his unfinished rooms to another housekeeper. Somehow, he still works here. Today, he came in, complained about his personal life and left without even starting a single room. I can't drop 12 rooms, I just can't. This is putting extra work on our already small housekeeping staff. I've already told our managers. Today only 2 of his 10 assigned rooms were assigned to guests arriving. I asked him to do at least those 2, but he just left. And I had to drop the rest of his board. I'm unsure how much longer he will be employed. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comments.